Picture this. It's 1945, and the most righteous war in human history has just ended. American GIs are coming home to ticker tape parades and grateful kisses. Nazi war criminals are facing justice at Nuremberg, and the world is finally ready to move on from the darkest chapter in modern history. Except, in the shadows of this moral clarity, something quietly extraordinary is happening. In a series of unmarked military transport planes, some of Germany's brightest scientific minds, many of whom spent the war building rockets for Hitler, are being whisked away not to prison cells, but to comfortable new laboratories in Alabama and New Mexico. Welcome to Operation Paperclip, where the line between victor and vanquished became as blurry as a mathematician's chalkboard, and America's moral compass discovered it had a rather flexible relationship with true north. The story begins, as most morally complicated stories do, with excellent intentions and terrible timing. As Allied forces swept through Germany in the final months of the war, they discovered something that made their strategic planners wake up in cold sweats. The Nazis had been terrifyingly good at science. Not just good, revolutionary. They had developed jet engines while Allied planes were still powered by propellers, created ballistic missiles that could cross the English Channel, and pioneered rocket technology that seemed borrowed from science fiction. Meanwhile, intelligence reports suggested that the Soviet Union was frantically scooping up German scientists and technology like shoppers at a clearance sale. The Cold War hadn't officially started yet, but its shadow was already long enough to make American officials very, very nervous. Enter Operation Overcast, which would soon be renamed Operation Paperclip after some bureaucrat decided that Overcast sounded insufficiently optimistic for a program designed to secure America's technological future. The operation's architect, Major Robert Staver, faced a delicate challenge. How do you recruit brilliant scientists who until recently were trying to incinerate London, while maintaining the moral high ground of having just defeated fascism? The answer, it turned out, was paperwork, lots of carefully crafted paperwork that had an almost artistic relationship with the truth. The crown jewel of this recruitment effort was Wernher von Braun, a man whose personal history read like a case study in moral complexity. During the war, von Braun had developed the V-2 rocket, a technological marvel that happened to rain death on British civilians and was built using slave labor from concentration camps. But by 1945, von Braun had undergone what intelligence officers charitably termed a denazification of convenience, suddenly discovering that his true passion had always been space exploration, not warfare, and that his Nazi Party membership had been merely an unfortunate bureaucratic necessity. American officials, desperate to prevent Soviet acquisition of rocket technology, proved remarkably receptive to this narrative revision. The ethical gymnastics required to justify Operation Paperclip were impressive in their creativity. Scientists with documented connections to war crimes had their backgrounds sanitized through a process that intelligence officials called bleaching, a term that sounds innocuous until you realize it involved systematically removing evidence of atrocities from personnel files. SS membership became administrative participation, weapons development became theoretical research, and exploitation of slave labor became industrial consultation under wartime conditions. It was historical revision elevated to an art form, complete with new identity papers that read like fiction and testimonials from conveniently cooperative witnesses. Meanwhile, the scientists themselves adapted to their new circumstances with remarkable pragmatism. Von Braun and his colleagues found themselves living in a surreal bubble at Fort Bliss, Texas, and later at the Redstone Arsenal in Alabama. They conducted rocket research by day, attended American social functions by evening, and somehow managed to avoid discussing their recent past with the same determined focus they brought to orbital mechanics. Local newspapers wrote puff pieces about the brilliant German scientists helping America reach for the stars, while carefully avoiding any mention of where exactly those same hands had been building rockets just months before. The program's success was undeniable, even if its ethics remained questionable. Von Braun's team would eventually develop the Saturn V rocket that carried Americans to the moon, vindicate American claims about the peaceful applications of their wartime research, and provide the technological foundation for America's space program. The scientists proved to be exactly as brilliant as advertised, and their contributions to American military and civilian technology were transformative. The uncomfortable question that lingered, however, was whether this technological advancement was worth the moral compromises required to achieve it. What makes Operation Paperclip particularly fascinating is how it reflected the broader American struggle to maintain moral clarity in an increasingly complex world. The same nation that had fought a war explicitly framed as good versus evil found itself pragmatically collaborating with the evil side barely months after victory. Intelligence officials justified this by pointing to the greater threat of Soviet expansion, but the logic required a kind of moral calculus that would have been unthinkable just years before. The Cold War, it seemed, had its own ethics, and they proved surprisingly flexible. The full scope of Operation Paperclip remained classified for decades, emerging only gradually through declassified documents and investigative journalism. When details finally became public, they revealed a program far more extensive than initially acknowledged. Over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians eventually came to America through various classified programs. Some had minimal connections to Nazi atrocities, but others carried baggage that would have been politically devastating had it been revealed at the time. Operation Paperclip ultimately succeeded in its primary objective. It kept crucial German technology out of Soviet hands and provided America with a significant technological advantage in the emerging Cold War. But it also established a precedent for the kind of moral flexibility that would characterize American intelligence operations for decades to come. The program demonstrated that when national security collided with moral clarity, national security usually won, and that victory came with a price that wasn't always paid by those making the decisions. Sleep well, remembering that history's most consequential decisions are rarely between obvious good and obvious evil, but between competing definitions of the greater good, and that the people making those decisions are usually too busy managing crises to fully consider the long-term consequences of their moral compromises.